item on the program, of course, and it's my privilege to moderate this last session. And the theme of this panel is, as you know, institutional resilience, strengthening biotech governance. How can national and international bioethics bodies remain effective and legitimate in an era of rapid change and growing skepticism toward expertise? And I'm really glad and happy that we have a distinguished panel that will help us to explore this crucial and important subject. And on the panel is Sarah Cunningham-Burley, who is the chair of Nuffield Council on Bioethics. As we know, we have met Sarah earlier today. On the panel, it's also Maria do Céu Patrão Neves, who is the vice chair of the European Group of Ethics and also the president of the Portuguese Council. Welcome, Maria. On the panel, we have also from Germany, Helmut Frister, who is the chair of the German Ethics Council. And from Denmark, we have Christa Lundgaard Kjøller, who is the director for the Center of Ethics in Denmark. We have also Katherine, who is the co-lead for Global Health Ethics and Governance Unit at the WHO. And finally, but not least, we have Laurence Lwoff, who is the head of the Human Rights and Biomedicine Division at the Council of Europe. So please take the stage, friends. All of you. Because we have quite brief introductions, so I think it is a bit time-saving if we do it like this. And altogether, we have 60 minutes for this panel. And we will begin with a short round of opening remarks from each of the panelists. And you have around 5 minutes each. And before this panel, I have got the consent from the panelists to put individual questions to you, just to make sure that we can cover as many aspects as possible of this issue within a time frame of 60 minutes. So without any further ado, let's kick off. And I think we follow the program. So I'm delighted to give the floor first to Sarah, please.
Okay, thanks very much. So institutional strengthening, or institutional resilience, strengthening bioethics governance. Sven-Eric asked me particularly to talk about a couple of areas that Nuffield Council on Bioethics has worked on, so I will do that very quickly. But I thought, first of all, I'll just say something about our overarching strategy, which kind of answers, or is a way in which we are trying to answer that question by strengthening bioethics and bioethics governance. So our strategy is really aimed at trying to make ethics matter and embed ethics in policy and kind of shift some of our ways of working to take that slightly more instrumental focus, so to influence policy. But of course, that instrumental focus has to be grounded in deep ethical analysis. I would say, actually, that has to be obviously, bioethics is interdisciplinary. It also has to be socially inflected ethical analysis, which I think many of the presentations today have been, because they are looking at the kind of wider political and social environment in which we have to grapple with some of the ethical issues. The NCOB is also able to be institutionally resilient, partly because it is independent, and that's not the same for all ethics councils. Our funding comes from 3 different sources. We are able to generate our own strategy, and so can be a combination of proactive as well as reactive. So proactive in terms of our priority setting based on our horizon scanning and other things that we do here. So we are really aiming to both make a kind of conceptual contribution, and some of that will be around kind of reframing debates, asking different types of questions, as well as that instrumental contribution of embedding ethics and setting our priorities through thinking about concepts such as what's distinctive about our contribution, what's timely about our contribution, and kind of achieving change and impact. So that has some influence on how we choose what it is we're focusing on, hopefully with sort of positive outcomes. So one area of work that was just starting when I took on role of chair was work around assisted dying. Now, we felt as a council that it was really important to be entering that debate, which had been a little dormant in the UK, not in all parts of the UK, but in England in recent years, and was time to sort of revisit this. This was before we knew that it would be on the current Labour government's parliamentary legislative work of its first year of term. But Jersey, which is a Crown dependency, I think, had already started doing work in this area and had a bill going through, and Scotland, where I'm located, was also doing the same. But our driver was to create public discourse here. It happened to then become more timely in that there was legislation being proposed through Parliament, so the work that we were doing was immediately relevant and was kind of was awaited, I suppose, in a sense, in terms of our findings. And the work that we did was a citizens' jury, so a specific form of public engagement, asking our publics in England what they thought about possible changes in law and what kinds of values and other concerns that they were bringing to that. And we also conducted 2 surveys, so a combination of qualitative and quantitative work that contributed to the debate. And it did that in a number of ways. So one, our very first report was taken up in the media. It was very, very early on in the parliamentary process. And so there was a lot of media coverage. There were many players and actors in this space that have things to say. And then working directly with parliamentarians, so through those that are doing our stakeholder engagement, holding workshops that would be inviting our legislators to and their research staff to influence in that kind of way. However, as a council, we didn't state a view or make a recommendation around assisted dying, and we were very clear from the outset that we would not do that. So we were presenting what the publics thought, providing some analytical, doing some analysis of that, but we ourselves didn't come up with a position. So 1 minute to go. So one more topic. We've already discussed some of this afternoon. We've just started a piece of work looking at the Human Fertilisation and Embryology Authority's proposal to extend the 14-day rule for embryo research. I think their proposal is to possibly extend to 28 days. So we have been funded by the Wellcome Trust to explore the scientific and ethical domains here and to conduct a deliberative dialogue. So we're doing that in collaboration with ScienceWise, which is a body that is funded across government and third sector to have a significant public debate about this issue, which will then inform those deliberations by that authority and possibly by Parliament should there be a recommendation to change legislation. So here again, it's an area we were interested in, we're working on. It's clearly a key political moment in terms of a sense that there needs to be a look at this, and then we have come into the frame to deliver the work that we will be doing there. So thank you.
Thank you very much, Sara, and thank you for touching upon the issues of assisted dying and the proposal from HFEA. I put this question because I think, it's really hot topics in the UK, so I think it was interesting to hear the interaction between you as a council and the public debate that you have on hot topics related to ethics. So thank you very much. Now I turn to Maria, and you have an excellent, I would say, overview of ethics in Europe, both from your council but also from the European Group of Ethics. So when I prepared this panel, I thought it should be interesting to hear from you how do you see the political landscape and the changes of the political landscape in Europe right now? Because it is shifting, it is no doubt about it. We heard from my colleague Göran Kolste earlier that we can see that also forces from outside Europe is supporting extremely right-wing forces with the purpose to try to influence the public debate in Sweden, in Europe. So it would be interesting to hear from you. How do you see that? If you can see it is also have an impact on work on ethics in the European Union and in your group of ethics. So please, Maria.
Okay. Congratulating the smear. I welcome your question about the political landscape. This is the easiest, I'm sure, because we all know that truly the political landscape is changing in Europe. It is also changing across Europe and at a faster pace, and that also influences what's going on in Europe. So in which direction is it really shifting? If we take the second half of the 20th century, I would say that the political environment was characterized by expansion and strengthening of democracies, openness to diversity and to inclusion, to integration, the development of human rights, the reinforcement of cooperation, and globalization. In a nutshell, I would say those are the main characteristics. But what do we see now? Exactly the opposite. We are witnessing the rise of authoritarianism, the erosion of democracy, protectionism, closure, the homogenization of societies through discrimination and exclusion of many, the weakening of human rights, the strengthening of competition instead of cooperation, and accelerating the process of deglobalization. So this change does impact directly the work of national ethics bodies. And I would just mention 3 points that I consider really important. The first one is that the current political shift is not only a change of political regime, but it really corresponds to a collapse of moral values. The moral values that have shaped Europe and the Western world since the Second World War, such as human dignity, justice, solidarity. So indeed, we have to acknowledge that democracy is not only a political regime, it's a set of core moral values. So when we swing from democracy to authoritarianism, this is causing the failure of human rights. I would even say that this political reversal represents, above all, a moral regression, and that hits the necks directly. The second point is that this political recession is likewise a denial of knowledge, of truth, of scientific evidence that is now replaced by demagogy, propaganda, and alternative realities. So everything becomes so fluid. How can we clearly establish the difference between facts and interpretations, knowledge and opinions, lies and truth? So the sound foundations of knowledge are somehow sinking, and this hits the necks also directly. The third point that I would like to stress is that by changing from cooperation to competition, and from globalization to deglobalization, this has also increasingly make us move forward to deregulation. And we are, the national ethical boards are regulatory bodies. And we are now in the process of deregulating. And this is also a reality here in Europe. For instance, in the field of artificial intelligence, environment, life sciences. So With this deregulation, I would say that it's giving more power to those that are already powerful and is weakening those that are already vulnerable. Regulation is needed to prevent abuses, to protect the weaker, also to mitigate unwanted consequences, and to promote also common good. I don't know how the time flew so fast, but I want to say that having this in mind, we have to revisit what's just said about the legitimation and the efficacy of national ethical bodies. So I would like to present some ideas about how to strengthen the legitimacy and effectiveness of these bodies, and I will just point out a few points, such as creating mechanism to hear the views of ordinary citizens, to provide better education, information, also to invest in communication, to promote literacy, and perhaps during the discussion I can go a little bit deeper, because I still want to finalize my intervention by saying there's a job here to be done by the national ethical bodies, but also by the international ones. And what we see at the international level is that many of the different ethic bodies are working in the same kind of topics. We saw this in the morning about neurotechnologies. So these several bodies having different opinions about the same issue. I do not believe this is good for public opinion. And besides, we are wasting resources. That has been the topic also here. So I would say two main points in relation to this. First of all, we need to build synergies, either through joint working groups during the deliberative process of the same kind of topics that are being worked by different bodies, or through the preparation of a consolidated synthesis document at the conclusion, but work much more together and to deliver some guidelines that really reflect a wider vision. And the very last point is assessing impact. If we are producing opinions, deliberations, recommendations, and so on and so forth about so many different issues, are we assessing correctly the impact of what we are doing? Because it's not the quantity that matters, it's how much impactful we become. So these are not indeed magic ones, of course, but I really think that there are new paths to follow in order to respond to the current challenges, and nurturing the legitimacy of the ethical bodies in general, national and international, through effective impact in society as a whole. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Maria. Thank you for that. And now we shift angle a little bit, and I turn to Helmut. And I know that you have reflected on where the trust in science is truly declining, and you have also reflected on the importance of clearly communicating what science can and maybe cannot do in a democratic society. It's a small topic for 5 minutes, so please, Helmut.
Okay, thank you very much, Sven-Eric. First of all, congratulations also from me, and it's a great pleasure and a great honor to be part of this 40th anniversary. When I read the topic of our discussion, I thought it implies that we are currently experiencing a time of rapid social change and an associated growing skepticism towards experts, towards science. Well, the rapid change and the political danger which was described cannot be denied. But I'm not so sure that we really have a growing skepticism towards science in society. In Germany, an institution supported by the major science organizations has been conducting a representative population survey on science every year the last 10 years. And among other things, this so-called science barometer surveys the public trust in science. According to these surveys, trust in science in Germany is currently higher than it was in the first survey in 2017, having risen sharply during the COVID-19 pandemic in particular. Also, it fell again after the end of the pandemic. It is currently still higher than it was before. In 2019, the last year before the pandemic, only 46% of the population stated that they tended to trust science, less than 50%. A few months after the start of the pandemic, in April 2020, the figure rises to 73%, and the latest survey for 2024, it was still 55%. The results of this survey do not fit with the assumption of growing skepticism towards science that dominates the current discourse, even in Germany. I suspect that the assumption is based on the fact that we are jumping to conclusions about the mood of the population based on the large number of skeptical statements about science in the social media. There is certainly a lot of skepticism and rejection of science in society, but this skepticism and rejection was probably present to the same extent in the past, and we only perceive it as stronger today because now social media provides a forum in which it can be publicly expressed and also politically instrumentalized. Keeping this in mind seems important to me as an antidote to the resigned feeling that I have sometimes, and that many of us are probably familiar with, of being overwhelmed by an ever-increasing anti-enlightenment wave. Of course, I'm not suggesting that we lean back and sit back, because 55% is not much. In particular, the possibility of political instrumentalizing the irrational rejection of the principles of scientific knowledge, so corresponding campaigns in the social media, naturally harbors the danger that this rejection will spread further in society and as a result call into question the social acceptance of the principles as a whole. And we are currently seeing where this can lead, particularly in the US. Even if most European societies are more secularized than the US, a similar development cannot be ruled out in Europe. As ethics and bioethic councils, we have the task of opposing such anti-enlightenment development. However, our means are limited. We cannot counter irrationality in any other way than through rational explanation, and we try to do it every time. However, I think it is important that we not only explain certain scientific findings, but also the nature and limits of scientific knowledge. On the one hand, this is necessary to order to counteract unrealistic expectations of science and the disappointments that will result from them. And on the other, it is very important to make it clear that there is a difference between science and mere opinion. In order to contribute to this, the German Ethics Council has chosen the topic Knowledge and Power, Science in Political and Society for its public fall conference, which starts next week. At this conference, we want to discuss what claim to validity science knowledge can make, how to deal with uncertainty, dissent, and contradictions within science, and what limited significant scientific knowledge has for political decisions. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Helmut. We're looking forward to hear the answer on that question. Now I turn to Christa, and when I heard it was possible for you to be on the panel, Christa, I immediately thought about the new organization you have in Denmark. So I think, if I'm right, it was 2022 you decided to establish a kind of umbrella organization responsible for the Danish Council on Ethics, the Danish Data Ethics Council, the National Committee on Health and Research Ethics, and the Medical Research Ethics Committee. So the question I thought about, can you see any changes in your impact in terms of ethics after that reorganization?
Thank you, Sven-Eric. Can you hear me? Yeah?
A little bit closer to the
Yeah, a
mic.
little closer. Yeah, thank you. Thank you so much, and thank you for being here, letting me be here and celebrate you. It's a very big day, and I'm honored to be here. The short answer to your question, or the easy answer, would say, yes, of course we can see an impact, a further impact. And it would be right to say yes, and it would be right to say no, because there are many advantages being a larger organization. Just to give you a few key figures, we are 55 employees, we have 7 chairs, and we have an annual budget around 6 million euros. And it makes it possible for us to bring together a lot of different expertise within scientific evidence, technology, law, policy, communication, philosophy. And in that way, we have created a stronger platform for the ethical considerations and putting them on the agenda. We also share knowledge and collaborate across the councils and committees. We have a chairs forum where all the chairs meet to discuss ethical questions that cut across the different bodies. So in many ways, we also experience that by working closer together and making use of our interdisciplinary strengths, we can ensure higher quality in the work that we give to the politicians. And we also experience a stronger impact when we present ourselves as National Center of Ethics. Both nationally and internationally, we see that it opens many doors because we are in this current political and societal attention on ethical issues. So I think that it has changed something in the way that the government look at ethical questions, definitely. If I should say something about the challenges in an age where the trust in institutions and science is under strain, I would say that we are still struggling to be involved earlier in the political decision-making process. In Denmark, a group of researchers has recently mapped the power relations within the parliamentary system, and they describe the current situation as what they call agreement parliamentarism. And in short, this means that a political majority negotiates an agreement with a minister, and the agreement is then passed by parliament without a real discussion open for debate. And that makes it difficult to change the agreement afterwards, even if new professional knowledge or ethical perspectives emerge that were not considered during these negotiations in the ministry. And the reason is that these agreements often based on carefully balanced compromises between the political parties. And on one hand, this agreement parliamentarism has made parliament more efficient and decisive, and on the other hand, it has given ministers more power. It has increased the pace of lawmaking, and it has led to greater political opacity. And skepticism often thrives in opacity. So the problem is then reinforced, you can say, by the general weakening of professional qualification within the ministries and in the central administration. And it is recently stated in a report from the Royal Danish Academy of Science and Letters, and they recommend that the professional capacity within the ministries must be sufficient to make proper use of the research-based advice that they are given. The ministries must ensure that professional knowledge is not filtered out of the basis from the decision-making. And they also suggest that the professional foundation for government decision should be public once the decision has been taken. So how should we as ethical councils react to this development? And I think that ethics councils play a crucial role in connecting ethical reflection with political decision making. We also need to be, we have a large responsibility, larger than before, to initiate public debate, as you said, and bringing all relevant arguments to the table. We also need to be more agile and able to seize the political issues as they arise, so that we can make our voice heard and the society voice heard. And we need to reinvent ourselves and connect with the public in multiple new ways, as we are finding that fewer and fewer people are reading our reports and statements, and they are seeking their knowledge on social media. So I think that, and now it's written with very small letters, so I have to take on my glasses. I think that if we should remain effective and legitimate in a skeptical age, it's not about defending expertise against the public. It's about redefining expertise as something co-created with society. And we must become trusted mediators between society and the political system. Thank you.
Thank you very much, Christa. Well, we have got 4 national perspectives from Portugal, the UK, Germany, and Denmark. So now it's time to get a more international perspective, and we are going to start with a global perspective. So I turn to you, Katherine. My feeling is that much of the bioethic discussion today is very much centered on what we think and what we discuss in the western part of the world, the industrialized parts of the world. But you are working with a truly global community, and you have some countries that have really, really high innovation capacity, like Japan, China, South Korea, Singapore, India. And at the same time, of course, you have also really, really poor countries among your members. So I thought about it, and I think it would be interesting if you can touch upon what you really see in terms of, if it is some emerging bioethics perspectives in this broad area you are covering in the World Health Organization. So please, Katherine.
Thanks, Sven-Eric, and easy question to answer in my 5 minutes. And as you go through the day, you hear different things. What I'm going to do is I'll give 2 concrete examples as an answer to that. But actually, I do want to start with an anecdote, because I think the world has changed, and actually where we sit in bioethics has changed. And earlier this year, I was sitting in a meeting in Washington, D.C., and Caesar happened to be in that meeting. And it felt like a fundamental shift in the way that global health and global health research is happening. And it was a meeting originally on fair and equitable research collaboration, but the title had to be changed to fair and resilient research collaboration for probably obvious reasons that you can guess, given where it was located. But what was really interesting about that meeting was it was clear our American colleagues were really struggling with what was happening, with the cuts, with how that impacted them, used to having all the money, used to operating with that kind of resource, and they were really struggling with it. And what happened after a day of sort of skirting around the issues is the second day started with the chair really opening up about how he felt about that and how they were struggling. And then people in the audience responded. So colleagues from South America and colleagues from Africa responded. And the first comment they said is, "Why didn't you come to us?" And the Americans in the room were going, "What do you mean?" And what I'm trying to say is when we think about people from low-resource settings, we always think of it being a deficit model. But they, right, these people know how to respond in low-resource settings, in chaos, with autocratic rules, right? They know how to deal with that better than we do, right? And this also talks to, Aldo made a point earlier about the ethics of governance. Well, there's also the ethics of how we behave and how we participate in research. What I'm trying to say is that's not an obvious answer of the shift in value, but also of us having to realise it's not a deficit model. There's so much we can learn from other countries where they've had to deal with things that we haven't had to deal with. And also that came through in COVID. In some ways, PAHO, our Pan-American colleagues, dealt better with the response to COVID because they just had Zika, right? And it took us a long time to knock on their door and say, how come you had your research ethics committees responding much faster than they were in Europe, right? Because we're not used to it. So I think there's a shifting of the order. And what I'm trying to say is we also have to shift our mentality to see that different value systems can add things in a way that we don't understand. So that's my less obvious example. And then I'm going to give you two more obvious examples in which I think values are shifting and coming in. And one is the Pandemic Treaty, which was signed early in the year. And now I'm not talking about what that's going to look like in implementation, because that's a different challenge in its own right. But there's no way that you would have had a treaty 5, 10, 15 years ago with solidarity, part of Article 3, up front and centre. Right? And that's not down to Western liberal democracy or Western values. That pressure came from a lot of non-Western sources and was taken up. And my point also with that is, and it's the same as my example at the meeting in Washington, you cannot respond to any of these types of challenges through an individualistic lens. It's not going to work. And Sven-Eric made that point really clear around pandemics, but also around the other wicked problems that we're working on at WHO and that you're also all interested in, like climate change and health. You cannot respond to this with an individualistic lens. It has to be through a solidaristic lens. And I would argue there's a lot of countries in the world that have done this a lot better than we have done this through a Western liberal democracy, because that has not been our starting point. And Africa and lots of areas in Asia do that much better. So that's the more concrete example of that shift. And I think it's a shift we have to promote, even whilst multilateralism and internationalism is under fire. And then the second example, which I alluded to earlier, is this inclusion of different types of knowledge bases. Now, we don't have it right. It's still a work in progress. But I think what's really interesting, and I look at it in the climate change, is there's a clash in values, and maybe we have to rethink our values. So you look at First Nations populations in Australia, for example, and they see nature as a life source, right? Not as a resource to be plummeted. Well, plundered is the word I'm after. Yes, thank you. And I think we really have to rethink and challenge our value system to think how we can rethink our relationship to nature. One Health goes some way towards doing that, but probably not enough. So I think there's room for us to learn from other knowledge bases, other societies, other systems, and not always view those other societies as a deficit model because we have been the power base and our values have been the dominant power base. So I'm hoping I'm leaving you on an optimistic and an open note. And I think one way of doing that, and I'm really glad Lotte's on the steering committee for the Global Summit of National Ethics Committees, is I really think we should use those type of fora better going forward. Really think, and this also was raised by Maria, how do we work better together? How do we use those type of fora to learn from each other and not just say, I've done my report's pretty good, and I'm pretty sure your reports are very good. But I think we really have to embrace these opportunities, especially as resources are even more constrained than they used to be. And I'll finish there, and thank you again.
Thank you, Katherine. So let's turn to Europe, Laurence. We know that human rights are under attack and threatened also in Europe. But having said that, I still see the Council of Europe as a kind of beacon for human rights in Europe. And I think your position gives you a unique overview of trends across the member states in the Council of Europe. So I think it would be great if you can elaborate a bit on the state of bioethics in Europe today and what you think can be done to further strengthen ethical governance in your member states. It's also a small topic for 5 minutes, but please.
Well, thank you very much, and I will join my colleagues in wishing a happy birthday to the Smer and thanking for this invitation. I just want to point out that I'm serving a committee that is not a bioethics committee. It's an intergovernmental committee. And to a certain extent, what I'm going to say, which is more the outcome of the discussion within that committee, show also the impact, for me at least, the impact of your work as National Ethics Committee on the discussion at intergovernmental level. And to me, it's a sign of optimism in that sense. I would like to start by, and I will repeat a lot of things that have been said in the room already since this morning. I mean, we were discussing that. Is it really a point for us to speak now because everything was said? But in 2019, the Steering Committee for Human Rights in the field of biomedicine and health has adopted a strategic action plan on human rights and technology in biomedicine. And in the preamble of this action plan, it was written, the role of bioethics should be to accompany progress in science and to reflect on and to protect and promote human rights. It goes to the heart of how we want to shape both the lives of individuals and the broader society. I think the last sentence remained valid, but now I'm going to read you what is in the draft strategic action plan for 2026 to 2030, and you'll see a change. The draft says, as innovation accelerates and structural inequality persists, the role of bioethics must evolve, not only to respond to the new realities, but to proactively shape policy debates and provide strategic foresight to address uncertain future, protecting the health and the right of both current and future generations. So it's very much echo, I think, what we heard. So I don't know what is the chicken and egg, but I would be tempted to say that what you've been discussing has an impact also at national level. So I think we are at a time of crisis, and I don't want too much to repeat what was said, but I agree with the democratic backsliding. I agree with the human rights erosion, so I'm playing with words, but it's the same idea. I think we have an approach to human rights which is becoming really individualistic, which is absolutely the opposite of the philosophy of human rights. We also have a trustworthiness crisis. I learned my lesson from this morning. I have written trust crisis. I said, no, trustworthiness. I fully agree with that. I think I agree also with your comment about the fact that maybe I would wish that we could be as optimistic as you are. But I think the people who are against are much more vocal now. So we have to do something against that. But I think I will add to this the value crisis. And what I meant here is not so much that we have different value, is that everybody is invoking value without exactly understanding what it is behind that. So I think we need clarity on that. Differences is possible, and we may have cultural differences on this, but we need to clarify that. And I think to a certain extent, ethics committee have also a role to play in this, in clarifying the term of the discussion. I think this is really important. And to me, it's quite meaningful that in 2023, the Committee of Ministers of the 46th member state of the Council of Europe has adopted a declaration, the Reykjavik Declarations, which is called United Around Our Values. I wish it would be global values, but it's our values. I think all these crises are also reminding us of the fragility of things that we thought were granted. And that includes human rights, obviously. So I think the pandemic was actually quite interesting in that respect. I think it demonstrated the importance of value-based approach, in particular for decision, both at individual and collective level. But my question is, did we really learn the lesson from this? I think it demonstrated also the fact that human rights, responsibility, and solidarity cannot be divided. They are indissociable. And that's a very important element. So we need to really have an approach that is rooted in shared fundamental values, promoting responsibility, solidarity, and trustworthiness. And I think another thing I would like to add is I think it's important to try to continue to work and discuss some theoretical aspect, but to go more into more practical type of answer. We have to address people with different backgrounds, with the public. We have also to address the industry and their vocabulary and their argument, and what is actually the notion of benefit from them is not the same. So we need also to adapt to that, to be able to get some win-win situations, even if the wave is not created by the same motivation. We have to surf it if it reached the same objective. And I think this is really important. And to me, for that reason, when we look at the new strategic action plan, the draft, I want to highlight two elements for me that are important. The strategic action plan is organized around different pillars, and I would like to quote two pillars: anticipation and engagement. And anticipation, I don't need to explain. I think there was a lot of things. But regarding engagement, I think we talked a lot about industry, or at least it was mentioned. And I think for me, it's not so much the industry, it's some stakeholders that were not present before in the medical field, in the health-related field. But another aspect for me is young people. It strikes me because we organized a forum with young people on AI. And clearly, it came out that the notion of privacy, for example, for them was completely different than my generation and, all generation in the middle. And also the fact that as we want to work for future generations, their perspective is really important. I'm not saying it's an issue of being right or wrong. It's just an issue of including their perspective, and that's really important. So opening to civil society, but also having this young people perspective is really important. It's not homogeneous, obviously. Young people are not a homogeneous group, but they have to have their place as well in the discussion. Thank you.
Thank you, Laurence, and thank you all for your contributions. Now we have some time for questions and discussions. And I ask you first if you would like to make some comments on the others in the panel, or maybe, yes, Helmut, please.
Let me just add that the young people, I found it very important, and we have an experience. We had a conference with young people about Corona pandemic, COVID-19 pandemic, how they feel about it, and it was a really great experience for us. We learned much of it, and so we are already planning the next conference with the young people. This is very important. And if I would like add a little point to the trustworthiness. I learned my lesson too this morning, but I learned also that one of the conditions for trustworthiness is to be reliable. And there we have a problem with science and the public, because what means to be reliable as a scientist? It definitely does not mean never change his mind or her mind. That's not science. But a lot of people in the public, they think he's not or she is not reliable. If we say now, contradictory to this, what was said a few years ago. And I think it's very important that we have to explain and to discuss with the public this point, that this is not a sign of not reliable to change his mind and to have different opinions. And that's the reason why we're trying to do this conference.
Thank you, Helmut. Maria?
Yeah, I would like just to make a very brief comment. Unfortunately, again, about trust and on science. I don't know if it is only, as you said, that the social media is much more vocal than the others. Because, for instance, with my students, I see that they have a really hard time distinguishing from facts and interpretations. They do not realize the difference between facts and interpretations, opinions and knowledge. So it's not just a thing of social media. I think that we really have to work on critical minds. This is, I would say, the fundamental ground to establish new ways of dialogue. We are living in a very polarized societies. How can we can talk about beautiful things like sharing values, but the values are not shared anymore, and people don't talk to each other anymore. They are in different corners. And there's a hole between these extremes. So what I believe that we need is really to try to find new conditions for dialogue, to establish bridges, because if we don't speak to each other, those that have a different opinion, we will never ever recover the sense of global, the sense of humanity. So, and I believe that the critical thinking is really of paramount importance to reconnect people again in this crazy world we live in, or crisis world.
Thank you, Maria. Katherine, and then Sara.
Just really quickly, this is the first meeting I've been to in a while where the concept of uncertainty hasn't been front and center. And actually, I think it's tied into the trustworthiness and it's tied into the reliability. And I think it's really hard to unpick, because I think what COVID-19 really showed to the public, a lot of the public, was that there is a lot of uncertainty in the way that we do science, and that there is room for disagreement. And I do actually think a lot of people didn't understand that notion pre-COVID, and you tie that into the uncertainty of the bigger world that we're in, and it's a real challenge. And I think we have to bring that to the fore in these discussions as well. I don't have the answer, but I do think it's part of our challenge.
Thank you. Sara.
Yes, I think we can have, despite the pessimism and the crisis, there are some grounds for optimism, I think, because it's optimism through generating spaces for dialogue, and we've had examples of what those have been across the work of the different ethics committees, and engagement across sectors, across disciplines, across ages, but also we have to be aware of the limits of science, and COVID demonstrated that really clearly, because science isn't ameliorating structural inequalities. That was the absolute direct experience of so many through the COVID pandemic across the whole globe. So we do also have to bring social inflection into everything that we do. But I think creating spaces for dialogue, whether they're small or large spaces, invited or uninvited spaces, is definitely the way forward.
Thank you, Sara. We have also some time for questions from the floor. Do you still have some power? Of course, please.
I have one. Given this illustrious selection of experts, many years ago when I was young and I heard about ethics councils, I thought this was a bit of an ideal of a Platonic republic of, learned scholars that think about.
Sorry.
Philosophy.
You
want me to repeat?
You need a mic, yes.
Okay.
No, he has two now.
So many years ago, when I was learning about that such a thing as ethics council existed, I was imagining these are, these ivory tower professors that think deeply about what's right and wrong. And of course, over the years, this has matured. But one thing that strikes me is, and this came up in various discussions, we heard about horizon scanning, we talked about talking to industry, talking to people, is are we thinking about our work in terms of ethics in an empirical enough way? Do we really know what our citizens, what the people affected by our recommendations are thinking?
Well, that's a subject for another session, I think. But do we have an answer? Maria?
I can just give you a couple of examples. First of all, the National Ethics Committee in Portugal, we see ourselves as being in between politicians, legislators, and the civil society. So we are somehow bridging both. So we need to be close to both, to civil society, because we need to know what their priorities are, what their issues are, what their opinions are. And we need to be close to politicians, legislators, because we want to influence public policies. So what we do in relation to not the politicians and legislators, but only referring now to civil society. Every time we work on a subject, we have hearings. We go to schools, we go to universities, we try to have different plenary sessions in different parts of the country, interacting, engaging with different sectors. And currently, we are doing what we call regional forum. Since September, we started this September, and we will go until July 26. And what we do is to select different issues and to go, once again, to so many different places, not only universities and centers of research, but also associations of agricultures, also civic associations, to discuss what do they expect from us, what are the issues that they would like us to work on, what are their needs and their wishes, their expectations. So we are trying to bridge, to become as so close as possible from civil society, somehow to interpret what their needs are and the way they see the world, what is for them solidarity, what is for them justice, what is for them, how do they live the values, not only at the theoretical level, because we know how to define them, but how do they live them? And what do they expect how do they expect them to be implemented in specific political policies? So that's what we are trying to do, and then to take the conclusions, not in a form of recommendations, but to be their voice near the politicians and legislators. So it's going to work, I don't know, exactly. We are investing a lot. This is a new way that we are taking now, and we'll see, we'll talk in 1 year, okay?
Thank you, Maria. I think we have time for one more question.
So while we're waiting
Sarah,
for the
please.
question, so that's a good provocation, Aldo, and I think that it's important we hold a mirror up to our own practices, which is what you're asking really, isn't it? And I think kind of building that reflexivity into everything that we do, which goes beyond all the suggestions that we make to improve things, we actually have to be asking ourselves, in a sense, what difference are we making and to whom across the societies that we're working in. So I think building that reflexivity into what we're doing is really important.
And impact assessment, to do real impact assessment.
I completely agree with this, but I still hope, Aldo, that we are professors who are thinking what's right and what's wrong.
Okay, time is running really fast when it's interesting, and I see that we are approaching the end of the day. So I would like to thank you all for your participation on this panel and for your contributions, and please join me in a big hand.